Lock the door, seal the vault, hide the treasure. Since time before time, we have protected our most valuable goods with every way that we can conceive of. But how? How did early locks work? What if magic was real and you could protect your stuff with a curse? What about biometric locks? Today, let's explore those questions. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. Just before we get into today's video, if you want to help me make more videos and read some cool fantasy books, check out my books. There is my epic fantasy series, The Sangwheel Chronicles, where I explore how the past shapes the future. It's received some good reviews, so check it out on Amazon or any other book retailer. There are also signed copies available on starvingwriterstudio.com. And on that same site, you can pick up a copy of the science fantasy novel Magic Fall that I wrote with my podcast partner, Drake. It has a flying cat. What's not to love? Or, if you like erotic fantasy that isn't just elven prawn, check out my work under the pen name Talia Tethers. So, if you're interested in supporting this channel, buy any of those books, and please do know that I appreciate every purchase and especially every review. Okay, enough of that. Let's get cracking with locks and circumventing them. Our journey starts around 4000 BC in ancient Egypt, where the earliest locks were large wooden devices. Pin tumbler locks were rudimentary locks that were composed of wooden pins. The right key would align the pins correctly to allow the bolt to move. Consider how in a fantasy setting, ancient ruins might still use such a system, with keys made of special materials or enchanted to last. The pin tumbler system served us well in protecting our valuables, but wood can only take you so far as a material. Fast forward 1,000 years or so to the ancient Romans. The Romans, ever the engineers, took the Egyptian design and improved upon it. They made locks and keys out of metal, making them more durable and practical. They also introduced ward locks with a series of obstructions or wards to prevent the lock from opening unless the correct key is used. This added an extra layer of security. And you can imagine a kingdom in your world using such locks to protect military secrets. The intricate design of the wards makes the lock almost impossible to pick, so anyone looking to get in is going to need a key. And by impossible to pick, I mean unless you're very skilled, because as we know, security is just prevention. Ultimately, anybody can bypass almost anything. But moving into the medieval era, locks became as much works of art as they were practical devices. These locks were ornate and symbolically rich, a testament to their crafters. In a high fantasy setting, these locks might be imbued with magic. Only those who can decipher the symbols and their associated magics can unlock the treasure. This could add an element of intellectual challenge to the quest to get past the lock. In our world, some of those medieval locks had the evil eye carved into them. In a fantasy world, you could add actual curses that need to be disarmed, or poisons hidden in intricate carvings, and other such devices to make the lock harder to bypass. The next stop on our journey is the Industrial Revolution, a time of enormous innovation. And if you're interested in checking out my video on magical industrial revolutions, you can click on the info card over there once this is finished. Now, in the Industrial Revolution, Robert Barron created the lever tumbler lock in 1778, followed by Jeremiah Chubb's double-acting tumbler lock in 1818. These designs were much more secure than previous locks and began to resemble the modern locks we are familiar with today. These locks had levers or tumblers that had to be lifted to certain heights to unlock. This allowed for more unique keys and thus more security. In a steampunk type world, those types of locks could be mechanized with gears and steam power, with keys that are intricate contraptions in and of themselves. But of course, speaking of modern locks, the pin tumbler lock that most of us use in our home today was invented by Linus Yale Sr. and improved by his son, Linus Yale Jr., of Yale lock fame, obviously. The design by Linus Yale Sr. and Jr. used pins of different lengths, making picking the lock significantly harder, and this principle is used in many modern locks. However, we should not forget abloy locks, which represents the current pinnacle of mechanical lock design. So this is an abloy key. Check that out. That is what they look like. These locks use rotating detainer discs, a completely different mechanism, which offers much greater security. Inside the abloy cylinder, a series of discs rotate and function like those inside of a safe. Only the correct key, turned 90 degrees, will rotate the discs, aligning the sidebar gates. After the discs are aligned to the correct opening combination, the locking bar drops into the aligned slot, allowing the lock to open. To withdraw the key, it must be turned in the reverse direction until it stops, and this will mechanically scramble the discs. Abloy locks are fantastic, except when it's set to lock and you accidentally slam your door and find yourself locked out of your house. I'm not saying I've done that, but I do have a spare set of keys with my neighbors. Anyways, in a magic-intensive world, discs like the abloy lock users could be translated into rotating magical glyphs or sigils, requiring the correct alignment to unlock. So you can use that kind of advanced disc design, that advanced safe locking design, and add to it a magical or perhaps a scientific component, if you're writing in an advanced science fiction world. In our world, locks have continued to evolve with the advent of combination locks and safes, providing a secure method for protecting your valuables without requiring a key. By using a sequence of numbers or symbols, these locks offer more possibility and hence increased security. In an espionage-focused world, the heroes might need to crack a complex sequence to access vital information. Or you could bring in runic magic, and certain runes could require activation in certain sequences. Runic magic in general shines when it comes to security. It's a spell that can be left in place in a certain location, and it can provide enormous security to whatever it is protecting. So if you have anything like runic magic or written spell magic, something along those lines, consider using it in a security setting if you have such a need. But back to history. A real game changer has been the introduction of electronic and biometric locks. From key cards and keypads to fingerprints and retinal scans, the iLock system represents the cutting edge of this technology. These locks are the peak of our current levels of tech. They use personal biological data or electronic keys for access. In a futuristic setting, these could use advanced biometrics like genetic codes or even brainwave patterns. Perhaps in a sci-fi universe, they could use unique alien biological attributes or sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. And this, of course, eliminates the need for keys completely and makes circumventing the lock that much harder. And if you enjoyed that quick overview of the history of locks, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about security beyond the lock and key. There are numerous ways to safeguard treasures, secrets, and access to important locations. A good world builder should think creatively about the setting's technology, magic, and even its flora and fauna. One of the most primal and effective methods of protecting is using fearsome creatures. The ancient people of India used crocodiles to guard their treasures. We, of course, use guard dogs quite often. There's a legend that the Siamese cats had a kink in their tails so rings could be put onto the tails and the cats could guard the rings. So animals are certainly an important layer of guarding our treasure. But this is fantasy. You could have a dragon guarding your treasure, like in Harry Potter in the bank vaults of Hogwarts. Or you could use a basilisk, or a gargoyle, or some other terrifying beast that guards that which you hold most dear. Naturally, you don't just need animals. Intelligent guards often provide the best security deterrent as long as they, are honest and can hold to a contract. In Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, the Kendra represent the pinnacle of these kinds of guards. They are creatures that are capable of changing shape to mimic any life form, and they hold to their contract as part of their very nature. This provides not only physical protection, but also acts as a psychological deterrent, as the Kendra could be anyone or anything. Besides guards, you could also utilize the environment and traps to play a pivotal role in protection. Consider the maze-like labyrinth in Greek mythology, or the dangerous booby-trapped temples in Indiana Jones. A world with advanced trap-making skills or reality-bending magic could create some truly nightmarish scenario for would-be thieves. The world of Eberron has House Kundarok, which is known for their bank vaults, which are safeguarded by multiple layers of magical wards and physical protections. The vaults are even enchanted to prevent magic teleportation, showcasing the importance of magical security. Indeed, magic introduces a whole new array of security considerations. How do you prevent a wizard from teleporting into your vault, or a psychic from learning the secrets straight from your mind? Magic security can be as simple as wards against specific spells, or as complex as requiring a specific emotional state to access a location. Remember, the goal of security isn't always to keep everyone out, but to control who gets in. By combining different types of security measures, physical locks, magical barriers, biological deterrents, and psychological challenges, you can create a world that feels deeply secure, complex, and vibrant. Now, always be sure to balance the security measures with the potential threats in your world. But, of course, the fun of a good heist story cannot be overstated. So, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about circumventing locks, no matter how good they are. Every lock, no matter how complex, presents a challenge to be overcome. This challenge can be met with brute force, with cunning, or in some cases, a bit of charm. Brute force is perhaps the simplest way to bypass a lock. Breaking the lock, forcing the door, or in the case of larger vaults, using explosives can achieve the goal. An example from history is the Hatton Garden heist in London in 2015, where a group of elderly thieves drilled through a 2-meter thick concrete wall to access the vaults. According to official sources, the total sum stolen had an estimated value of £14 million, of which only £4.3 million has been recovered. However, brute force is often loud and messy and attracts unwanted attention, and indeed, our elderly thieves from the Hatton Gardens did get themselves arrested and sent to prison. And this is where more subtle methods come in. In the world of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, the hobbit Bilbo Baggins uses his stealth and his ring to bypass the guards and unlock the treasure-laden mountain of Smaug. So you can certainly use magic items to provide additional stealth to allow for lock-picking or more subtler ways of entering. But if your characters are going to lockpick, they need to know how locks work. So you need to have characters who understand pins, tumblers, discs, lock systems, and how to combine them in case there's magic or other deterrents. Sometimes, though, picking the lock or brute forcing it is just out of the question. And for those situations, you could turn to stealing the keys. This often involves social engineering, manipulating someone into giving up their keys or allowing access to a restricted area. In the real world, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist in 1990 saw thieves dressed as police officers convince security to let them in, resulting in the loss of artwork worth $500 million. A uniform and a little confidence will take you a long way. But now let's turn our attention to some specific fantasy heist stories. One of the most famous is probably Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, specifically the first book, The Final Empire, which is basically a heist story. The protagonist, Vin, and the crew led by Kelsier, her mentor, plan this very complex heist to infiltrate the treasury of the Lord Ruler. The lock on the treasury is not a traditional one, but rather a hefty steel gate combined with a magical ward. And circumventing the security measure requires a combination of allomancy, the magic of burning metals inside yourself, as well as social subterfuge. Vin uses her Mistborn abilities, which allow her to burn all types of metals, to change her weight and push herself up to the top of the cavernous chamber where the treasury is located, in a sort of a Mission Impossible style. And Kelsier uses his social standing and manipulation to distract the noble class, giving her that opportunity. The whole book setup is them studying for this heist and planning for this heist, and for Vin to learn how to act around nobles and all of that kind of activity. It's a really well planned and executed heist with a great twist at the end, which I won't spoil. Another great example is Skin Game by Jim Butcher, where Harry Dresden is forced to assemble a team for a high-stakes heist in the underworld. This team includes a professional thief, Anna Valmont, from the Church Mice group. Now, one of the central parts of their plan involves breaking into a high-security vault in the real world. This is where Anna Valmont comes in. She needs to do that actual action of breaking into the safe in the real world. This will then create a setup where the real world matches the Never Never, the magic realm of the Harry Dresden world. And they can then open a portal into the Never Never, into a specific location, which allows them an attack vector on Hades's vault. Hades, like the Greek god. Now, as it turns out, Hades's vault then also has a whole series of perilous trials afterwards, where you've got an ice gate and a fire gate and a death gate, and these all have to be beaten inside of the Never Never before you reach the vault itself. Again, it was a very interesting setup to have this like vault you have to break into in the real world that then mirrors a location in the Never Never. Such dual-layered security measures, requiring both mundane and magical skills to overcome, can add a fantastic depth to heist scenarios in your world building. Consider how magical abilities, social dynamics, and character knowledge can create intriguing and complex scenarios beyond simple lockpicking or key stealing. And if you've gotten value out of this video so far, consider giving it a super thanks or becoming a channel member, and let's move on to some cultural aspects of locks and keys. Keys and locks also have cultural and ceremonial importance in our world. The key to the city is an honor bestowed by a city upon esteemed individuals, such as visiting dignitaries or heroes. Originally, in medieval times, this privilege represented the freedom of the recipient to enter and leave the city at will as a trusted friend of the city dwellers. Over time, this has evolved into a more symbolic gesture, demonstrating a city's respect and trust for a particular individual. This ceremonial tradition can be woven into the fabric of your fantasy worlds. A hero, having saved a city from impending doom, might be granted the key to the city at a grand and public event. Or perhaps it's given to a visiting royal from a foreign land, signaling a deep bond of friendship between the two nations. In dystopian settings, the key could be a real thing, granting recipients access to privileged areas or resources. Or in a sci-fi setting, it could give you access to information, like a cloud security vault or something like that. It would be very interesting to play around with such a key being a real reward, not just a symbolic gesture in a fantasy world. However, it's not just rewards that have special ceremonies. Guarding the keys themselves can become surrounded with certain mystique. For example, let's discuss the ceremony of the keys for the Tower of London. This ancient ritual is held every evening when the main gates of the tower is locked for the night. At exactly 9:53 p.m., the chief human warder, dressed in a Tudor watch coat and bonnet and carrying a candle lantern, leaves the Bywood Tower and falls in with the escort to the keys, a military escort made up of armed members of the Tower of London Guard. The warder passes his lantern to a soldier and marches with his escort to the outer gate. The sentries on duty salute the king's keys as they pass. The warder first locks the outer gate, then the gates of the middle and Bywood towers. The warder and escort march down Water Lane until they reach the Bloody Tower archway, where a sentry challenges the party to identify themselves. So the sentry will say, "Halt! Who comes there?" And the chief warder will say, "The keys." And the sentry will say, "Whose keys?" And the chief warder will say, "King Charles's keys." And then the sentry will say, "Pass King Charles's keys, all's well." The warder and escort then march down to the foot of Broadwalk steps where the main tower guard is drawn up to meet them. The party halts and the officer in charge gives the command to present arms. The chief warder steps forward, doffs his bonnet and proclaims, "God preserve King Charles." And then the guard says, "Amen." And on the answering Amen, the clock of the Waterloo barracks strikes 10 p.m. and the last post is sounded, marking the end of the ceremony. The guard is dismissed and the chief warder takes the keys to the king's house for safekeeping overnight. This ceremony started somewhere in the Middle Ages, so it is seriously old as dirt. In your fantasy or sci-fi world, a similar daily ritual could take place, perhaps to safeguard an ancient relic or lock away dangerous creatures. Such a ritual could be central to life in your city, with the entire populace pausing to observe the ceremony. But it could also be a pivotal plot point. What if the keys are stolen or the ritual is interrupted? What secrets might be revealed? And what dangers might be unleashed by such an activity? Remember, locks and keys aren't just about keeping things safe. They're about trust, control, and power. Using these aspects in your world building can add a rich layer of realism and drama to your narrative. And before anybody tells me that I should have spoken about the show Lock and Key in this video, I have only watched a few episodes of it, so I don't feel confident in speaking about the complexity of that magic system. But I will someday make a video on that. If you're interested in that, hit me up in the comments down below. But in the meantime, these were my thoughts on locks in a fantasy world. If you want to say thanks for this video, super thanks is enabled, or you could become a channel member and get early access to my videos. If you enjoyed this video, Check out my video on creating a Thieves Guild. The algorithm does love it if you click on additional videos, so check that out. And I will see you soon for another one.